First of all, when you're from the Free State, you all know that we use English in self-defense, and that's the only time we do so. You've all heard that one. But I hear you talk about this racism problem, and I can assure you we don't have that problem in the Free State. We are still finishing up the Anglo-Boer War, so we're about to sort out the British first, and then we'll get to the racial issue. The reason why I'm saying that is for those of you speaking English as a first language, I apologize in advance for what I'm about to do to your language, because it does not come naturally to me. Despite the title that the Americans gives one, they're very put on titles. The point is I am from a town called Oudendaalsrus. It's a small mining town. I practice in Welkom, which is a bit bigger. But in Oudendaalsrus, if you grow up in a mining community, things are quite simple. I mean, the guys where I come from, they tune their car every morning. You know, when they go out and say, how's it my car? We all get that. For those of you who speak Afrikaans, ek sê die ouens het altyd hulle het V8s. Elke naweek haal hulle sy engine V8 en dan Sondag as dit hom V terug. So it's an interesting place to grow up, but you get the salt of the earth. So for my English-speaking friends, apologies in advance that you might miss me on one or two words. But I want to focus on the message and not on my vocabulary and the am, is, and ahs and all that comes with it. One thing, however, is that I realized today again how faithful God is. Because last year, sometime I came across this book called What Does God Know About Business? And I ordered it over the internet, and I read it, and I thought to myself, man, wouldn't it be great to meet Nico in person, you know, just to catch his spirit. And tonight I had the privilege of sharing a meal with him. So God has been faithful in that, and I'm so glad because I've asked Nico for his permission to use some of his testimony in the teachings that we do, because it's so difficult to find real spiritual leaders that not only teach these things but live it. But let me get to what I want to get to. If we talk tonight, I'm going to get back to what I was asked to speak about, worldview. Now, last year I spoke about ownership, and I thought I will go beyond that a little bit, not to repeat myself. And I hope that, and I trust that God has put a message on my heart that I believe some of you, or hopefully most of you, need to hear. But before we start, if you don't mind, I need some prayer, so let's just bow our heads if you don't mind. Father, I want to remind myself that you are the reason that we are here tonight, and therefore I want to lean back into you, Holy Spirit, and I pray that you will anoint my lips, and that the words that I speak will be the words that you want your children to hear. So may you be glorified tonight, Lord. May it be for your purpose, and thank you that we can dedicate this last session unto you. Amen. All right. Somebody will have to keep time for me, Anton. 10 minuten, dan weet ek, because I don't have a watch and there's no one in the room, or not one in the room. I usually start with this. We are a US-based ministry, and the only thing that I have in common with the ministry home office, I said to them the other day, I said, the only thing we have in common is we're both from the States. You're from the United States, I'm from the Free States, but that's about it, because the rest of it just doesn't gel. But whilst I was in the US at our home office receiving some training and stuff, I came across the story of this man, and I'm going to run quickly through it. It's a man called André Turner, for those of you who haven't been involved with those of you who know his life story. Anyone in the room? A couple? One, two? Great. Now, I actually read this book, and it just struck me when it comes to worldview. I want to use this as an introduction. Now, Mr. Letourneau left school at 14 years old. He said that he in school doesn't gel, more or less like Nico also confessed. And he became a mechanic. First he worked on what we knew in our older days as ASCOR, and then later on he became a mechanic, and he called himself a common mechanic. And his trademark was to make holes in exhaust pipes, so that, you know, when you step off the petrol, it will sound like a V8. Now, where I come from, you know, that counts for something. You know, that's a big speed boggerel, big beat boggerel speed kind of thing. Now he was lying in bed at night, and as the guy were coming over the hill and they stepped off the fuel, he could hear the beat of the engine, and he would know, okay, that's Peter's car. I made the hole this side of the silencer, and so on. That was his trade. That's what he kept himself busy with. And the Great War broke out. And being a mechanic, they put him in a ship belly to work in an engine. And then during that time period, he discovered the workings of electrical machinery. And after the war, he decided that he wanted to use some of these things. And he designed what I think could easily be called the first bulldozer. Now, that's a picture of it. He called it a gondola. And he started tendering for work because back in those days, they mainly used donkeys to do earth-moving work. But it didn't go well. He didn't make too much money, and at a point in his life, he stood on the verge of bankruptcy. Actually, I think it was the age of 46. Forgive me if I've got it wrong, but that's what I recall it for. So he was quite well advanced. And he testifies, he says that when he was still in his early 20s, he got his fire insurance, meaning that he gave his life to Christ, but that was about it. No, that's the way he refers to it. He said, so he made a commitment one night. He said he got his fire insurance, but that was about it, because Sundays he went to church, but Mondays looked completely different from Sundays. And he just carried on with life. And what happened is during this period of time in his life when he was about to go bankrupt, he prayed and said, Lord, please help me. And there was a contract that came up. They was busy building a massive structure in a town close by. And he realized if he would get that tender, that will be his ticket to financial freedom. So he put in the tender and he prayed about it and he named it and he claimed it. And I don't know what else he did with it, but he expected that to be his breakthrough. And the tender was awarded, but not to him. And then he realized he's in big trouble. And he actually went to his church and he said to the guys, listen, never mind my creditors. I now need to feed my family. Does anybody have some work for me? And one of his brothers in the church said, listen, I've just cleared a plantation. If you want to, you can come and pull up tree stumps for me. He said, can you pay me? He said, yeah, well, not much, but I'll pay you. You can feed your family. So that winter, he started pulling tree trunks on this cleared plantation. But something happened that winter. It started raining, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and it didn't stop raining. And the guy who got the contract for the earthworks, his penalty started kicking in and he went bankrupt. R.G. Turner was sitting on his tractor, pulling tree stumps, sitting in the rain, spending time with God. And he had an encounter with God. That evening he came home and he said to his wife, you know what? I realize that God owns this business. And I realize that God is in control. And if he wants to keep this business open, nothing is going to close it. And if he wants to close it down, nothing is going to keep it open. His wife, she must have been a glorious woman. She said to him, my love, if everything belongs to God and the business belongs to him, we cannot ask him how much we should give. We should rather start asking him how much we are allowed to keep. Because if everything belongs to him, we cannot give him anything. Now, this is not a talk on giving and tithing. I'm just getting to a story here. And at this point in their life, on the verge of bankruptcy, they asked the question, how much are we allowed to keep? And the answer they got was, you're allowed to keep 10%. 90% goes to the kingdom. So they flipped what we call as a norm, basically. But the moment he did that, something happened. And that evening, he started having dreams about machines. And when he got up in the morning, he started drawing these machines. And he started patenting, and he started building these machines. And these are some of the things that God gave him in his dreams that he started building. And he became so successful that the last time I checked, which was about 10, 15 years back, he was the private individual with the most registered patents to his name. Second most, sorry. He was only beaten by Alexander Graham Bell, the guy that developed the telephone. And all of the monies that he made with these patents went back to the kingdom. And he made a bundle. In his book, he makes a remark. He says, I keep shoveling out, and God keeps shoveling in. The problem is God's shovel is so much bigger than mine. He actually had to have planning sessions to get rid of money because he applied the principle. And when he got out of debt and he had a simple home and he had a simple car, his wife came to him again. That's why I said I would have loved to meet her. She said, honey, when God said he owns it all, don't you think he meant all of it? and they started giving everything. They just kept alive basically on that was what's provided. And at some stage, they came to him, they said to him, Mr. Letourneau, we want to explore for oil on the oceans. We're done exploring for oil on, on solid ground. Can you help us? He said, no, I can't. I'm a common mechanic. He said, but God can. And he started praying about it. And he built his first oil rig. It's called the Viper. The other day with Hurricane Katrina on the news, they said that all these oil rigs were pulled into the Letourneau shipyard for amends for repairs, still named after him. And at some stage it went so well that the world came to him and said, listen, can't we buy your patents? And Holtz trackers, or tractors for those days, went into partnership, or they bought over his company, and that became what is today known as Caterpillar, which all of you know well. Now, what is amazing about this, every time I see a caterpillar, I think about something different, because this is where it started. A guy that made holes in exhaust pipes went up to this company, and you should go read his life story. I actually went so far, and I ordered one of his books from Texas, and when it arrived, I had the blessing that he actually inscribed it himself, R.G. Letourneau, and he wrote there Matthew 6, verse 33, first seek the kingdom of God. That was his life verse that he used. And that was such a blessing to me. He actually became so famous, the world honored him. That's the Letourneau University in Texas, and that's the statue that the world has built of him. But that's not what I want to get to. When reading this and engaging with his life story, I came across this, what he said. He said that in his great sermon on the mountain, or on the mount, the Lord said, no man can serve two masters, for he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. We all know that one. He says, I think a lot of people get mixed up that way. They have just enough religion to make them miserable and not enough to make them happy. They can't enjoy serving the pleasures of sin because they know better, and they can't enjoy serving the Lord because they are not willing to serve Him all the way. And at that stage in my life when I read it, that was vir my evangelie. I realized what he was talking about. You see, I came to believe, I became convinced, I'm not a preacher, therefore I'm not teaching theology here. But when we get saved, it's like coming out of Egypt and we go through the Red Sea. But do you know that the majority of us, we die in the desert? We never set foot in the promised land. Whilst in the desert, spinning there with our 4x4s and making U-turns all around the mountains, we look back into our rearview mirrors and we remember the pleasures of Egypt. Now, if you were at the lifestyle that I had before I came to Christ in my 30s, those pleasures meant a lot of things. But also, we never get to the point where we would step onto the Jordan and go into the promised land. Most of us get stuck in there. Now, this is coming back to worldview, and this is how I want to earth it. Because the question is, if you're looking in your rearview mirror or you're looking ahead and you're stuck in this place, your worldview determines a lot of things. Looking back to Egypt or looking forward to the Jordan but never being able to enter that promised land. And a book, I see one of the questions they say that you should ask the speaker. One of the books that meant so much to me is about stepping out, going into the promised land was, I hope that most of you have read it, it's a book by A.W. Tozer called The Pursuit of God. And he pointed out to something that I actually lost sight of. He made it clear and said, if you want to have Christ live in you and through you, you have to die yourself. But our urge for self-preservation is so strong that you cannot kill yourself. Try to drown yourself in a bathtub. You can't do it. You have to create a situation where you cannot change your mind, like most people, or the people do when they decide to end their lives. So at some point in your life, when you say, Lord, but I want you to be completely in control, and I want you to basically take over, live in me, and most importantly, live through me, you have to give Him permission to do something to you. And that is stepping through the Jordan. And that will change your worldview. And that brings me to this that I've shared to those of you who were here last time. Leo Giglio puts it so nicely. You see what our problem is as Christian business people? we need to realize something. This is God's story. He has started this thing, and He's going to finish it. Whether you like it, whether you believe it, I don't care. God started this, and He's going to finish it as sure as He's alive. And He's inviting us to become part of the story of His. And we have a role to play in His story. The problem we have as business people is we're busy with our story. I'm busy with my company, I'm busy with my family, and then we do a very Christian-like thing. We invite God into our story. Lord, please come and bless the business for us. Lord, would you please give us some guidance? Lord, should we? And God says, okay. And we do the Bible studies and all of it. God says, all right, so you're inviting me into your story, but do you realize that I'm actually busy with my story? And I'm inviting you into my story? Now, if there's one takeaway that you can, hopefully, which I hope you will do, take away tonight from this session, it will be that distinction. Because we get so caught down in inviting God into the stuff we're busy with, we lose sight of the stuff that God's busy with. And it's a matter of one day you're in His story, and the next day when you wake up, I'm back into my story. And we get stuck in that way. What is the world's most famous view? For those of you who've studied economics, Milton Friedman said, the only obligation of a business is to make a profit. He's one of the most renowned economists and teachers on economy. I'm not an economist, but I do not agree with that. Neither should any one of us who has a Christian worldview. You see, Will Rogers put it so eloquently. He says the problem with the rat race is even if you win it, you are still a rat. And we should not lose sight of that. Even if we win it, we are still a rat. Now, if we want to get to a point where we don't want to be a rat, what do we have to do? And this is where our worldview comes in. How should we look at business if making a profit is not a primary concern, or should not be a primary concern? And even if I win the rat race, but I don't want to be called a rat, what is important? And this is where we have to decide in which story we are. Because we can be very much busy with this maze that we call a rat race. And we can very much invite God into it. And we can even win it, whatever winning means to you. But we might get to the point where we find that I've actually missed it. So the purpose is determined by a worldview. Now, just a couple of scripture verses. Colossians, Paul writes, he says, set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are on earth. If we can get our mindset, somebody mentioned, if you read through your syllabus on page 42, it says it's about the cognitive mind. We say, we should love Christ, love your God with all your heart and all your soul and your mind. Do you know how difficult it is to do exactly that? But if we put our minds on the things that are above and not on earth, we get to a point where we say to ourselves, okay, so what Paul says is, so whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do all for the glory of God. The question that we was posed by Niku just in the previous session, how to handle that where your financing dried up. I have found that one question serves to answer about 95% of the questions that we have in our boardroom, even as lawyers. And whenever we're confronted with a question like Niku was, we ask one question: what will glorify God? Is it a matter of going to the Swiss banks and saying, okay, we'll compromise? Or is it a matter of no more? We're not going to kick out the church. What do you think will glorify God the most? Because that is what we've been called for. And that usually sets it straight for me, and it answers all the questions. Even Jesus himself said something. He said in John 17:4, he said, I have brought you glory. He's praying to his Father in heaven. I have brought you glory on earth by completing the work you gave me to do. That is in Timothy Keller's book as well. Now, what is interesting about this, did you know that the book Purpose-Driven Life has exceeded, the sales have exceeded that of Harry Potter? To what I understand, and please don't quote me on this, but to my understanding, apparently it's now the best-selling book next second to the Bible. Now, if that is true, what is the reason behind it? And the reason is quite simple. Do you know how many people ask the question, Lord, what is my purpose? And if Paul says, whatever you do, It's about the glory of God. And Jesus comes, he gives us the key, and he says, listen, complete the work that God has given you. Because he says to his Father, Father, I have glorified you by completing the work that you've given me. And you all know this, and this is going to sound very pastor-like, but each one of us has got a calling. And each one of us has been called to do something. And if we want to glorify God in doing so, it is basically in completing that work. The purpose of God, the purpose, the oorkoepel and the purpose, the umbrella, is to glorify God. When we, as Crown Ministries, did a rebranding exercise, let me go one back. We had a group study of I don't know how many people, and we asked people, what is the words that you want to hear the day you die and you appear before God? And almost without exception, I think there was a few exceptions. If you don't mind, I'm going to step down here. Daar is baie onveilig. And almost without exception, everybody said the same thing. Does anyone want to take a guess? Well done. So Crown's tagline became, do well. It's not a prosperity teaching. If everyone urges to hear the words, well done, we say, okay, how can we help people to do well? And if you look at the book, Purpose-Driven Life, for instance, in the very first day, those 40 days that you would read it, I actually discovered something that I actually should have stopped reading for the rest of it, because in the very first day, it became clear that we have to come to the realization that we are made for God. God wasn't made for us. And that sounds simple, but this is the his story, my story kind of thing. We have to realize that we were made for him and not the other way around. With all due respect, you understand what I'm saying when I say God was made for us. So if the purpose is to glorify him, we have certain functions underneath that. And I'm going to be briefly touching on those functions because this is about worldview. If our worldview determines our purpose, and we should have a Christian worldview, and we've heard that now from all the previous speakers and the videos, what does a Christian worldview look in practice? Because we want to get real here. I mean, it's good to talk about Bible verses and philosophy, but for us in the marketplace, what does it look like? The first one is quite simple, evangelism. I want you just to for a minute, come to this point where you think of yourself. See a father walking to his shop with a young man or a young boy in his hand, holding his hand. They're going to dad's shop. When I meditated on this, I actually saw the shop name. It was Joseph Incorporated. And it was Joseph himself with Jesus as the eldest son, been trained to take over the family business. Now, can you see that picture? They arrive at the shop, open it up, whatever that might have looked like. When they come in, you have inventory. They probably have an order book or some kind of order because somebody ordered a yoke or something that needed to be built. I'm sure they weren't the only carpenters in town, so they probably had competition. If they were too expensive, people probably would have gone to the next guy. So it was all the business principles we deal with every day. Jesus grew up with those. Now that should not surprise us then, when Jesus started his ministry, that if I can just get my figures right here, he had 132 public appearances. Of the 132 public appearances, 122 took place in the marketplace. Only 10 in the temple. Depending on how you count the parables, there was 52 parables that Jesus told, and 45 of those relate to the marketplace. In the book of Acts, we get 40 supernatural interventions by God. 39 of the 40 took place in the marketplace. And you know what got to me? When Jesus chose his 12 disciples, not one of them came from the church of the day. All 12 of them, as we know, came from the marketplace. You see, a third of the world tells us they're Christians, give or take. Another third tells us they're Muslims, and another third is something else where they don't care. That technically means that 2/3 of the world needs to be saved. That's 7 billion people, two-thirds, give or take 4 point something billion people still needs to be saved. The other day I read a quote by Leonard Ravenhill, and he said, when was the last time you lost sleep over people dying without Christ? And I had to confess, never. I've never lost sleep about people dying without Christ. Now, if two-thirds of the world needs to be evangelized, tell me who's better positioned? The pastor, who sees more or less roughly the same people every week for an hour, or we in the business field, in the marketplace, who sees people 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, and it's roughly different people every day. Who's better positioned to evangelize the world? Because if you talk about evangelism, people usually see some kind of tent somewhere in deep Africa or somewhere here along the lines. But what God is asking us, when He talks about evangelism, we should immediately see the marketplace, a place that Jesus knew. Now the question begs, how do we evangelize as business people? We can start with our employees. Our employees, I always say they have to listen to us because they paid. We had a farmer the other day. We've got a couple of farmers there in our area as well, and he was applying some of these business principles. And he came to the point, he shared with me, he said one day, he said to his farm workers, guys, you show up now a quarter of an hour early. We're going to start with Bible reading and prayer and scripture reading and prayer. And God said to him, no, not on their time, on your time. So he said to him, okay, sorry, come on time. I'll give the first 15 minutes or 30 minutes of the day for scripture reading and prayer. And he was sharing with me the other day, he said, one morning I was late, and he says, I was driving down the dust road to get to where we meet. And as I turned the corner, the most beautiful sight that I've ever seen. All my farm workers on their knees in the dust praying for rain, for blessings on the farm that they're working, for me. And he said, that's something. We start with our employees. They must listen to us. Our suppliers, they usually want to listen to us because they want our business. I've got two, maybe I shouldn't say this because I haven't got his permission. Let me use this. Larry Burkett, who's the founder of the ministry, he received a Christmas card one year, and the card said, Merry Christmas, thank you for paying your account on time. On a Christmas card. He thought that's a very funny statement. So he called the supplier of paper for Crown's Paper Supplies. He said, listen, thank you for this Christmas card, but if you don't mind me asking, this is a very funny remark you made. And he said to Larry, I enjoy your teachings, teachings. I enjoy your teachings, and I listen to you on the radio quite often, and I'm a Christian myself. He says, but every quarter, we as a board of directors come together and look at the non-payers, people that owe us money. And you'd be surprised how many ministries and churches is on that list. And then they turn to me, knowing I'm a believer, and saying, so this is how you Christians do business. He says, I thank you that I can turn to Crown's account and say, no, this is how Christians pay their accounts, because you pay your account the moment you receive it, not even at the end of the month. And I want to thank you for enabling me to testify to God and to stand up for what we believe by the way you pay your account. Simple ways. The question that Trevor here asked, how do we influence the world? You don't necessarily have to run in with the Bible, but we all know the old saying, people read us, and we are sometimes the only Bible some people read. Our peers, have you ever been called that religiously unstable friend? I mean, the biggest compliment that you can get is when you come up to a lawyer's or a legal fraternity meeting and you hear the guys go, chip, chipsy, kom hier, chip, chipsy, kom hier. I used to get offended by that, but actually it's an honor, because what I have found, when these colleagues of mine's life starts falling apart, you'd be surprised how quickly they run to the religiously unbalanced guy for advice. And you don't have to hit with the Bible. How do you evangelize our customers? They see the way we do business. There's so many examples of that. I love to listen to Niku. In America, you've got companies like Chick-fil-A, and one of the farmers in our district, other one I was speaking to, there was a lady who came to him who wanted to sell him fertilizer. Now, they're big farmers. They're planting 6,000 hectares of maize every year, so that's big. So if she can get that order, that will probably be over and beyond her target. And when she walked in, he had a spirit of discernment. And he said to her, lady, God shows me something about your life and that you're not married, but you're living with a man. And she immediately burst into tears. And he said to her, listen, let's just sit down and let's talk about that. 3 hours later, she left his office with the order in the one hand, the Bible in another, and Jesus in her heart. Right there and then, he led her to the Lord. Because he discerned immediately. Now that's how we evangelize. People talk about the 10-40 window. We should never miss the 8-5 window. When your desk becomes your pulpit, it is amazing what we can do. We as business people have been called. If we just look at the way Jesus approached this, can you think of others? Examples. Paul the tent maker. Peter was a fisherman, as we all know. Lydia, seller of purple. And Luke, a doctor. We had a speaker here a couple of years back, a man called Stanley Tam. He wrote a book, God Owns My Business. You can find him on YouTube as well. Where he decided, I'm not going to, it's a long story, but just in brief, he decided at some stage to give half of his company to God because he wasn't doing too well. So he went to a lawyer. That's why I like the story. And the lawyer said to him, listen, you're nuts. There's a zoo down the road. Go there. He actually had to go to 3 lawyers. The third lawyer took him serious and said, okay, Uncle Stanley, if you want to give half of your business to God, let me help you set it up. They found some process, but the point is they signed an agreement. Stanley Tam and God, G-O-D, he's alive. And he transferred 50% of the shares. And guess what happened to the company? You can go read it yourself. It went through the roof. And then one evening, God said to Uncle Stanley, he said, Stanley, I'm nobody's partner. I owned it all. It's mine to start off. You're the steward. I want the other half as well. And then he asked God, Lord, now, being a businessman, how much are you going to pay me to run this company for you? And guess what? Look, God answered him. Minimum wage. He worked in his own company for the rest of his life at minimum wage. When he was in Cape Town testifying, at that stage in his life, he plowed back $300 million into the kingdom. Now, if he has to appear before God and give account for the way he did business and what he used his business for, I would like to be in Uncle Stanley's shoes. Currently, last time I checked, he was staying in a modest house, doing woodwork in his garage, and he had a sign on his pavement saying, anybody who wants to talk about Jesus or needs a plate of food, step this way. And he has a file this big of people who sat down while he's doing woodwork where he would share the gospel to them and lead them to Christ, and he would write down their names and their testimonies in that file. Whose story is he busy with? He started off inviting God into his story. And then he was blessed to get to the point where God said to him, you know what? Actually, I've invited you into my story. So now take this business of yours, these plans of yours, and get it aligned with my story. What we try to do as business people is we want to get God aligned with our story. Get him involved, want the blessing, the guidance. Nothing wrong with that. But you know what happens? The moment we start living into God's story, all of these other things, these Bible studies, these praying of blessings, this guidance, all of that happened. I mean, Niku is a testimony of that. But which one comes first? Function 2, discipleship. The things that you have heard from others in presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful. So how do we disciple? I always say to people, evangelize is talking, discipleship is doing. Who do we want to disciple? Start with yourself. I used to be what I call a submarine Christian. You know, come up on Sundays and just see what's going on at church, and then you're underneath. They don't see me again. But the moment when Mondays and Sundays became the same day, and I realized I can glorify God more by the way I do business on a Monday than actually praising him on a Sunday, something changed. Your family, your managers, your employees. I was sharing with, forgot your name, sorry. Zelna, about how many employees she has or is working with her. For us as business owners, do we really think for a minute that when we sit down with God at the end of our life, we're not going to have a talk about the people that worked for us and how they look at us and the way we do business? I read in the Business Day 2 weeks ago that the cycle of the destruction of the third generation has now changed to the second generation when it comes to discipling family, because the majority of businesses are family businesses. And as you all know, grandfather started it out, he started the business, dad kind of built it up, and then the grandson comes and he destroys it. That cycle has now changed to the second generation. And it all boils down to discipleship, where we don't carry and we don't put across and we don't train up the next generation to receive that. And the next one is funding. I just took one verse there that came to mind, but there's so many verses. When I was meeting with Chuck Bentley, he's the CEO of the ministry, he told me about this rep, the guy, a rep. He told me about this business guy who appointed a rep to go expand the business. I think he was in Boston, and he sent him to a close-by town. And he said to him, listen, I've booked you into a hotel for 2 weeks, and here's an expense account. Please go and expand the business. Go find some potential customers, find a site, do whatever is necessary. You're a professional rep. So the guy got to the town, booked into the hotel, and the moment he walked into the hotel, he thought to himself, wow, what a shabby place. So he took the expense account that he was given by the owner, and he ordered for himself a color TV because they had a black and white TV, and he paid it with the expense account. And then he decided after a while, this sitting on the bed watching TV doesn't work for me. So he had delivered to him a lazy boy, so he can watch TV very conveniently. And lo and behold, he didn't like the bathroom, so he got out a contractor to redo the bathroom during the 2 weeks that he was staying in the hotel room. 2 weeks later, he reported back to his boss, and he said to him, tell me, boss, very excited, how did it go? And he said, listen, before we start, I just want to tell you what a great boss you are to work for. The guy thought to himself, okay, that's strange, but tell me, how did it go? Did you expand the business? Now, obviously, this is not a true story. It's just a modern telling of an old parable. If we as business people think about this just for a minute, eternity is so long, and our place on earth, we are not here merely for 2 weeks in this hotel room. If you all know the story of the beschrijving of taking a line all around the world and putting a spot on it, and that's our time on earth. That is 2 weeks in relation to eternity, booked into this hotel room, and God gives us an expense account. And He gives us clear instructions. Go, make disciples, evangelize. When we report back after 2 weeks, what will our response be? And if we have to show God what we've done with it, that He's entrusted to us. And usually here people start feeling guilty about having houses at the sea and second homes at the river, lake, or whatever. The point is that's not what I'm talking about. If I can just balance it this way. When I dealt with God with this because of the things that I know He gave me that was excessive, I said, Lord, why? Must I give up all of this? And He said to me, look at your daughter's 6th birthday. And when my youngest daughter became 6 years old, she said to me she wants a bicycle. So I went to a local shop. I said, listen, I want the grandest, fanciest, best bicycle for a 6-year-old girl. Up to today, I don't know what I paid for it. But I wanted to bless her because I love her. And sometimes God just wants to bless us. So don't feel guilty about the things that you have necessarily. But the point is, when we decide to live simply so that others can simply live, you'll be surprised how many people can be blessed. Ask yourself this. How many people can be blessed if you decide that enough is enough? Just ask yourself that question. 10 years back, and I haven't updated, it came from Operasie Mobilisasi. Do you know what it cost? I'm lying, it's 14 years back. What it cost for you as a business person to sponsor a minister and his wife and their 4 children in India to work full-time. Now, you must keep in mind their living standards are very low. So how much do you think it would cost you to sponsor a pastor with his wife and 4 children in India, and they would live on the living standard of a medical doctor 12 years back, 14 years back? 400 grand? 400 rand. It's actually 500. 500 rands it would cost you because of their living standard. I've seen people spend 500 rands buying a round of drinks in a bar. I'm not saying we all should now start doing that. I just want to challenge our mindset when it comes to what have we been called to do. And we talk about the funding. Sorry, I missed it there. How do we fund? Money is the obvious one, but you know as business people what we found most difficult is time. I mean, you all know what a schlep it was or what it took from you. Schlep is not the right word to be here today. If I would ask you, give up 4 hours to be here or send a check for 200 rands or 400 rands, you probably would have sent the money. Because money is easy to give, believe it or not, it's time. I want to finish up. Meeting family needs. That's another function. This is one we don't usually have problems with, but it says, if anyone does not provide for his own, especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This is a tough one. When I meditated on this one day, I was sitting in the office. I said, Lord, what do you mean about this? I've got the one of family. I mean, provide for his own and especially for those of his household. I've got the household under control, but what do you mean by providing for my own? And at that minute, our tea-girl walked in. Her name is Miriam. And I realized, maybe she's my own. I mean, she's been with the company. And she was coming like a ghost and put down my tea. And sometimes I would grunt a thank you in her direction because you're kind of busy. So I said that day to her, I said, Miriam, just sit down for a minute. I mean, she got the fright of her life. She probably thought I'm going to fire her or something. She sat down. I said to her, listen, how long have you been serving me tea? She said, about 2 years. I said to her, Miriam, what is your surname? Let's just start with the basics. What is your surname? And she gave me a surname. How many children do you have? No, she looks after 9 children. Extended family. Where do you stay? Kutlanong. How do you get to work? Taxi. How much does it cost you? 25 rands back, 25 back for 50 bucks a day. I said to her, thank you. She left. I called our office manager. I said to her, how much are we paying Miriam? May God forgive me. We weren't looking after our own. And I went to my partners and said, you know, we'd like to do the Christian thing here, but we're not looking after our household or our own. And we went through a process of paying everybody a fair salary. We had to explain to them the parable of somebody who started working at 6, I don't want at 12, the other one at 3, getting the same pay, because believe me, you don't want the unions on your back, but at least you have the principles that you can apply. The very next year, 2008, the recession struck, and we had to pay these increased salaries. And I went to God and said, Lord, what now? How does this work? We did the right thing, and now we're paying for it. And God said to me a clear message. You do the right thing because it's the right thing. I will never owe you just because you did the right thing. We can't manipulate him. The 5th function is to generate a profit, and this is the last one. I'm not going to go into the details because you guys can probably lecture me on how to make a profit. There's a lot of biblical principles on that, but that will be for another day. So if we talk about the purpose is to glorify God, and we have the 5 functions, the one at the bottom here is a function, which many of us sees as a purpose. I have put it at the bottom here for a particular reason, and this is because it holds up. It holds up. You show me a business that doesn't make a profit, I'll show you a business that's going to close down. Profit is not a sin. It's actually a blessing from God, but it's not a goal in itself. It's a function. We need to get our priorities straight in doing so. I'm concluding with this. A friend of mine, his brother-in-law was a contender. He's living abroad. He was a contender to do the 110-meter hurdles at one of the Olympic Games. And he prepared his entire life up to that stage to compete in these hurdle event. And right at the point when the first heat started, he was so nervous that when he had to walk up to the starting point, he turned around and said, I'm done. I'm not going to compete. And his coach said to him, why? And basically this was the reason, because that is what it looked like from his perspective. This is a mess. I mean, if you look at it, there's some camera sticking out there, and he's probably the coaches and the whole world looking on, and 5 other people wanting to beat you at it, and it's a complete distorted story. It's almost like what our life looked like sometimes when we compete in business. And his coach did something that just kind of struck me. He said to him, kneel. And he said to his coach, this is not the time to kneel. He said, no, kneel down. And the moment he kneeled, his vision changed. That is what it looked like. All of a sudden, he could see the end goal. Everything else didn't matter. Only the first hurdle, the first thing that he should do. I want to encourage us as Christian business people with this. This is something that has just struck me. The best way or the best position to view the world from is on our knees. If we realize what God has called us for and what we need to do, and we get our priorities straight, you'd be surprised how quickly these things falls into line. But this is not an easy message. So the only takeaway I'm asking you is when you spend time with God, ask Him, is He welcome in your story, or have you joined His story? Because that is what it boils down to. Thank you.